When we were in Vegas on our last visit, we headed to the Wynn Buffet and challenged ourselves to try one of everything on the buffet. There are over 100 items on this buffet, so we weren't sure if we would make it, but we did. In this video, we're going to show you everything that was on the buffet that day and whether or not we think it's still worth eating for $75 at the Wynn Buffet.
The first thing that I ate was the home-style chicken noodle soup. I was pleasantly surprised by how much flavor that it had, and the noodles weren't soggy. This was a delicious soup, honestly, and it was a good start to the meal. Next up was the truffle mushroom pizza. When I bit into this piece of pizza, it had a nice crunch to it. The toppings were rich and savory, but the crust was my favorite part. I really liked this pizza a lot. The next thing on my plate was the strawberry walnut salad, which I also really liked. It was light and had a great flavor. I really liked the dressing, and this was a refreshing salad that was overall very pleasant. There was also an assortment of cheeses, and I tried the Irish cheddar, the Swiss, and the Parmesan. I liked the cheddar, but the Swiss and the Parmesan had been sitting out on the bar for too long, and they were a bit dried out. There are also quite a few fresh fruits on the bar that you can choose from, and I tried the star fruit and the dragon fruit. They were both nice and very fresh.
I started my meal with the creamy tomato bisque, which was very good. The flavors were nice and balanced. It was very smooth and I really liked it. The next thing I tried was pretzel bread, which unfortunately was very dry. The flavor wasn't bad, but it had been sitting out for a little too long. I also tried the seared ahi tuna with mashed potatoes. The seasonings on this were good, but were a little on the spicy side for me, and unfortunately it was cold when it should not have been. It wasn't horrible, but it could have been a lot better.
The first thing I tried was the Mexican zucchini. It didn't really have much flavor, and it was only lukewarm, so this wouldn't be something I would try again. I followed the zucchini with a pork tamale, which was really good. The pork was bursting with flavor, but it did have a little heat after a minute. It wasn't dry and it was still warm, and overall was a great little tamale. I also tried some of the charcuterie, starting with the white cheddar cheese. It had a good flavor but was a bit dried out. Next was the candied pecans, which were crunchy and very sweet as they were heavily coated in sugar. I followed that with the slow roasted pork loin, which was okay, but it didn't have much flavor to it. And then I tried the salami, which didn't even taste like salami and was not good. And finally, I had some pineapple, which was nice and refreshing. And to finish this plate off, I had the smoked salmon salad. I took one for the team on this one because I'm not a fan of cold fish, and this was no exception. I was not a fan.
My first food item was the salmon, and it was unfortunately a little dry. This fish wasn't bad, it just had a stronger fishy taste than it should, and it had been sitting out for too long. Next, I tried a crunchy flatbread. It had a great texture and surprisingly a little bit of heat at the end. Overall, it wasn't bad. There are multiple types of caviar here at the Wynn, and I decided to try all of the options they offered. First, there was the flying fish caviar. It had a very strong fishy flavor. In fact, I commented that this was fish central. I didn't care for the first one. Next was the Yazoo paddlefish caviar. This one was much better, but it surprisingly had a strong carrot flavor. The third was Tobiko caviar, and because of how strong the carrot-like flavor was on the previous bite, I didn't really get much flavor on this one. And finally was the Masago caviar, which had a good seafood flavor. Overall, the last one was my favorite.
For my next plate, I started with the chicken carnitas, which were really good. They had great Mexican flavors to them, but again, it was somewhat cold. Overall, it was still a good dish. I also tried the pork carnitas, which were even better. These were actually warm and had even more flavor to them and seemed to be more tender. Of the two options, the pork was definitely the better option. Next up were the black beans, which were cooked well and were actually still warm. But buddy, they had some serious kick to them. I normally can handle some heat, but they were way too spicy for me. To finish this plate was the Veracruz Pacific cod. You could tell that this cod had been sitting out for a very long time. It was not flaky like cod normally would be, but rather was as tough as jerky. In fact, I took one bite of it and then made the comment, "It's cod jerky." It was so bad that I spit it out because we were worried it might not be safe to eat and I did not want to get sick.
The next plate started off with a scallop. This was horrible. It tasted like really bad old cream spinach on top of the scallop, and it was so overpowering that is all I could taste. It was so bad that I couldn't even finish and I spit it out. Avoid this one. I followed that with the shrimp scampi. Thankfully, this was good. It had a really nice shrimp flavor. Next up was the whole hot crab legs. These were difficult to open, but the crab inside was really good. These were delicious, really sweet crab legs that were actually hot. And overall, this was one of my favorite foods from the night.
Continuing on, the next thing I tried was the corn. Sadly, this corn was very old and very vile. I'm not sure if I would have even liked it if it had been fresh though. It just wasn't good. I also tried the gyros, which tasted just like all of the other Mexican chips I've tried. Next, I tried the pork rinds, which were yummy and salty and crunchy. I love pork rinds, and this was a good one.
These mashed potatoes had a good buttery flavor to them, but they needed some extra seasonings. I added salt and pepper, and that helped, but these were overall one of the best things that I ate on the buffet. Generally, I don't like asparagus because it's too stemmy, but I was surprised that I actually liked this one. It was grilled and it had a nice buttery flavor to it. The texture was not too tough or stemmy, so I did like it. The next thing that I tried was the fingerling potatoes. These potatoes were okay, but they didn't have hardly any flavor to them. They were cooked well enough and were soft, they just had zero seasoning to them. If you're one of those people who add salt and pepper to everything anyways, then you're going to like these potatoes. I followed that with the stuffed sole filet. This was one of the few things on the buffet that wasn't cold. The shape threw me off a little bit since it kind of resembled a dollop of potatoes. It was one of the best fish options that I had here. It was flaky and had a nice white fish flavor, and this was actually seasoned well, which I appreciated. The last thing that I ate on this plate was the honey barbecue grilled chicken. This chicken thigh was cooked perfectly. The meat was tender and juicy, and while the barbecue sauce didn't have much flavor to it, the chicken itself made up for it.
I was a little hesitant to try the Maryland crab cream spinach because it didn't look so good, but I was surprised that it was actually good. It wasn't too fishy, it was nice and creamy, and the toast was toasty. The next thing I tried was the shrimp cornbread. I didn't care for the shrimp because it was chewy and the sauce was way too spicy, but the cornbread itself was really good and wasn't dried out like I expected it to be. The pepper pork belly mac and cheese actually surprised me. It was very creamy and not dry or cold, and the bacon added a nice saltiness to the dish. The chicken and biscuits, on the other hand, were horrible. I couldn't even cut through the chicken, so I decided to pick it up, and it was so dry that it was harder to eat than jerky. This item was very dry and flavorless. Next, I tried the chicken cordon bleu. It was not dry or crusty at all and was very good and fresh. The flavors were very delicious, and I actually went back for more of this one.
For my next plate, I started with the shrimp cocktail. It was very good and had a great shrimp flavor, and whatever that sauce was, put this over the top. The next thing I tried was the Mongolian roasted crab, and it was some of the best I've ever had. The sauce had a really nice salty flavor, and combined with the sweetness of the crab, it was one of the best things on the bar by far.
The next thing that I tried was the egg drop soup. The eggs were a little bit thicker than I'm used to, but this was overall a good soup. The broth was a little bit spicy, but I did like it. I had high hopes for the dumplings since this was one of my favorite buffet foods, but sadly there was hardly any flavor at all. The texture was good, but without the flavor, it was a disappointment for sure. Next, I tried the shrimp one, and it wasn't bad, but the shrimp flavor was pretty strong. I wouldn't get it by choice, but there were much worse things that I ate. The leek cakes, once again, just didn't have much flavor to them at all. I enjoyed the outside of it the most because it was nice and crispy, but overall, this just wasn't that good. However, I was not a fan of the next one at all. It didn't have a good flavor and the texture was just downright awful. Definitely skip the char siu pork bun. The spring roll, on the other hand, did not disappoint. It was the first really good thing from this section for me. The outside was nice and crispy and the filling had a lot of great flavor. I went back for more of this one. Next up was the seafood pad thai. Unfortunately, it was a bit spicy, so I didn't eat much of it, but it had a nice texture and a good overall flavor. The shrimp here was surprisingly delicious. It was very crispy and had a delicious honey-like flavor. I went back for more of this bang bang shrimp because I really enjoyed it. The next thing I tried was the Peking duck fried rice. Honestly, this was kind of unique, but it wasn't bad. The texture of the rice was nice, but the flavors were not something I'm really used to. The kimchi was honestly better than I expected it to be, but it's not one of my favorite foods by any means. And finally, I finished this plate off with the pickled ginger, which was very spicy and I was not a fan.
The next thing I wanted to try was some of the carved meats. I started with the beef steam chip, which was good. It was not the best I've ever had, but it did have a nice salty flavor. I did wish I had grabbed some of the au jus to eat with it to combat the slightly dry texture. The other meat was a sea salt crusted prime rib. This one was just okay. It was a little bit on the chewy side and the flavor just wasn't there for me.
My next plate started off with some assorted grilled vegetables. I love grilled veggies, but I was sadly not a fan of these ones. They were tough and cold and just overall not good. There was another grilled veggie dish that was onions and zucchini, and that one was much better. The onions were caramelized really nicely and the zucchini was nice and soft, but it didn't have as much flavor as I was hoping for. The grilled mushroom was also delicious. The turkey was unfortunately extremely dry. In fact, it was so disgusting that I spit mine out. Avoid this one. The ham was also a little bit on the dry side, but it had a great flavor and I did like it. Between the two, this one was obviously much better. The rotisserie chicken unfortunately was bone-in, which is not my preference, and it was also a little bit dry and cold. Honestly though, the flavor was good, I just wish that it would have been a little bit fresher.
I did one of the build-your-own street tacos with chicken and other various toppings, including pico de gallo, cheese, and salsa. Overall, this was probably my favorite thing that I ate here at the Wynn. The chicken had a great flavor by itself, but coupled with the cheese and the salsa, it made for a great little street taco. The next plate that I had was some of the different meat options. First was the pork loin, which was extremely soft and tender. It had a nice flavor and you could tell that it had been slow roasted. There were two different kinds of pork belly. The first one was absolutely amazing with a great, almost crispy texture to it, and it had a great flavor. The second one was sadly much tougher and was somewhat chewy. I definitely preferred the first one. And lastly for this plate was the sausage. This sausage was sweet and sadly not very good. It was okay, but not the greatest.
Next, I tried a bao bun. This was a pretty typical bao bun. It had all the sweet and savory flavors that you would expect, and the texture was nice and spongy. It was really good. I also tried the edamame, which had no flavor, which was surprising since it was coated in sesame oil and seeds. Next, I tried the avocado cucumber roll. The flavors were nice, but the rice was crunchy and dry and had clearly been out on the buffet for too long. The second sushi roll I tried was the California roll, and it was a little bit better. It was still crunchy, but the flavors were nice. The final one I tried was ebi nigiri. The rice on this one was not crunchy, thankfully, and this was much better than the other two.
The salmon poke was thankfully very fresh. The rice was really good and so was the salmon. Combined with the sauce, it was a nice fresh poke that I enjoyed. The next was a seaweed salad. This one was pretty good. It had a crunchy texture and the sauce did have a little heat to it, but it wasn't overpowering. It was good. The shrimp papaya salad was very fresh and I really liked the flavors. The papaya and sauce complemented the shrimp really nicely and it was a great dish. The marinated mussel I ate was not good at all. It tasted old and I had to spit it out. Next was a salmon sashimi, which had no flavor. It just had that squishy, raw salmon texture. The final thing I ate on this plate was the Dungeness crab. This one was a little bit fishy and not as good as the other crab on the bar. Overall, it was just okay. Next, we moved on to the desserts. The first dessert I tried was a chocolate cake pop. It was not good. It had a fudge consistency, which sounded good, but it wasn't. The dark chocolate flavor was really overwhelming, which once again sounds good, but it really wasn't. The key lime dessert, on the other hand, was good. It was really creamy and had a nice lime flavor. It was light and refreshing after a big meal. Next, I ate a dessert cone. It was a very good dessert, and I thought it was going to be like a s'mores cone, but instead it just turned out to be a delicious chocolate-covered marshmallow. The chocolate was on the darker side, but the crunch of the cone really added to the dessert. I would definitely eat this one again. The salted caramel cupcake had an angel food cake consistency, which was a tiny bit dry, which is why this cupcake only got 4 stars. But the frosting on the top was amazing. It had a tremendous salted caramel flavor. I really liked this cupcake. The next thing I tried was a tiramisu dessert. Once again, this was a top-notch dessert. It had a tremendous espresso flavor without being overpowering, and it had a very good creamy consistency. I really liked this dessert. The Hawaiian cake compared to some of the other desserts here at the Wynn Buffet was just okay. It had a decent cake consistency and definitely had pineapple and other tropical flavors, but it just didn't impress me. The chocolate cake just didn't wow me like some of the others did. All I got was a heavy chocolate flavor with a slight consistency of a brownie. It just didn't have any good flavors to make it stand out.
There were only a few gluten-free desserts here at the Wynn Buffet that I could have. One of them was the ice cream, and I tried the mint chocolate chip flavor. The ice cream itself was really creamy and it had a strong but not overpowering mint flavor to it. I really liked it. The next dessert I tried was the creme brulee. It passed the crack test with a nice caramelized topping and was very creamy and delicious. Buffet creme brulee is hit or miss, and this one was actually really good. The passion fruit dessert was not my favorite. The passion fruit was overpowering and very tart and bitter. Personally, I don't like sour desserts, so this was not a great one for me.
The first dessert that I tried was a vegan donut. The flavor was very good, especially the icing flavor, but this was sadly dry from sitting out for too long. Honestly though, I wouldn't have even known that it was vegan because the flavors were so good. It was just sadly a little too dry. Next, I tried a cake pop, and it was so disgusting that I spit it out. Don't even bother with the cake pops here because they are really gross. The vegan marble cake was also so incredibly dry and was not very good. Same as the donut, I think if it hadn't been sitting out for so long, it might have been better, but it just wasn't good. I followed that with a lemon meringue dessert, and it had a very strong lemon curd on the bottom, but the meringue was so very light and fluffy. The crust was nice too, but the meringue was my favorite part. If you like very strong lemon desserts, then chances are you'll like this one. I was hesitant about the berry cheesecake because it looked very old and dry, but surprisingly, it was nice and fluffy. The downside was that there really wasn't any flavor. I took a bite with berries, and that added nice flavor and made it a lot better. The vegan strawberry cake made me very nervous, and honestly, it tasted just as bad as it looked. It was so dry and tasted like disgusting strawberry toothpaste. Avoid this one for sure. The next thing I tried was a really old fruit tart. It somehow managed to be both dry and soggy at the same time. I love fruit tarts, and this is a disappointment.
The first thing I tried was a donut. While it was a little on the dry side, I was still surprised that it was good. I've had quite a few buffet donuts in my lifetime, and this one was better than most. The cookie I tried next was a big disappointment. It looked really good, but it was actually chewy and in a really bad way, and it tasted like paste. It was a big letdown. The first thing I noticed about the strawberry tart was how pretty it is, but I'm usually worried with these ones because while my eyes like it, my mouth typically doesn't. Surprisingly though, I actually liked this one. It was very nice and creamy, and the tart shell was not soggy or dry. The blackberry tart, on the other hand, was once again adorable, but sadly, it had been sitting out for too long. I could tell though that if I had eaten this when it was fresh, I would have really liked it. The next thing I tried was the vegan chocolate cake. It was very dry and very gross. This honestly just tasted like a very dry, pre-packed, store-bought Little Debbie cake. The strawberry shortcake surprised me because it was actually really good. It was a very light and airy dessert with nice fresh flavors. If you like strawberry shortcake, try this one.
There are a few fresh juices available on the buffet. The first one I tried was raspberry, and it was not good. It was extremely watered down and honestly not worth drinking. The second was pineapple guava, which was better, but again, it was really watered down and therefore not good. The last one was pineapple mango, and while better, it was once again watered down. I feel like if they didn't have so much ice melting in them, they would have been really good. I also got the cookies and cream crepe with Oreo whipped cream, and it was really good. The crepe itself was delicious, as well as the toppings. However, it was a little on the sweet side for me, but overall really good. I managed to grab a cappuccino cake right when they pulled it out, and it was delicious. The cake itself was very moist, and the cappuccino frosting had a wonderful coffee flavor without being bitter. This was one of my favorite desserts. Unfortunately, the red velvet cake was not as fresh. The flavor was there, and the cream cheese frosting was really good, but the cake was crusty and clearly had been sitting out there for way too long. Other than that, the flavors were there. The turtle bar was nice and warm, but there were too many pecans and they overpowered the dessert. This dessert wasn't bad, it just needed to be balanced better. I tried the flourless chocolate cake as well, and again, the flavor was not bad. It was just so crunchy from sitting out. Even the raspberry was old. The cake flavor itself tasted good. It just had a horrible, dry crustiness to it.
I was very nervous about this chocolate chip cookie because it seemed a little too soft, but it was a nice surprise that it was actually a very good little cookie. It had all the elements that you want in a really chewy chocolate chip cookie, and it was delicious. I love churros, but when I broke this one open, I was so disappointed to see that it had a fruit filling, which I do not care for. So maybe if you like apple-filled desserts, you would like this one, but it was a miss for me. This next dessert was a blueberry cobbler, and this was the worst thing I ate during my whole meal. The flavor and texture were both absolutely terrible. Avoid this one at all cost. The chocolate bread pudding was not too bad as far as bread puddings go, but I really disliked dark chocolate, and that was the only flavor I was getting, so this dessert was not for me.
The next dessert that I tried was a blackberry tart, and it was disgusting. The blackberry flavor was very dark and heavy, and the jelly was sticky and dry at the same time. This one was really, really bad. I love chocolate molten lava cake, so I was very hopeful that this next one would be good, but once again, it was not. The flavor was just not good, the texture was not good, overall it was just really gross and a big disappointment. Once again, the pecan bar that I tried next was also so bad. It was chewy and crunchy and soggy and so gross.
Overall, our feeling about most of the items on this buffet was that they were dry and old and had been sitting out for far too long. We came close to 6, so it was a bit disappointing how many of the items from the bar were not fresh, even though it was a good time of day. We did think that some of the desserts were better here than they were at some of the other buffets in Vegas, but overall, we were disappointed in our experience. So how about you? Do you like the Wynn Buffet, or do you feel like it's overrated? In our opinion, the best buffet in Las Vegas is the Bacchanal Buffet, and you can click here now to watch our video about that next.